My contention is this conversation about our relationship with the European Union, about how the EU evolves and presents itself as a 21st century organisation. This conversation was inevitable and it was going to have to be had. We're seeing what's happening in continental Europe, those bulwarks of stability in Germany. Germany is now politically incredibly unstable. Greece, we've already seen. Italy, politically falling apart. France, nearly, not very nearly, but nearly, elected a neo-fascist as their president. So we remind ourselves that, yes, we are dealing with turbulence, but the idea that if we hadn't had that referendum, that somehow European politics would have just continued cruising at a nice steady state and we wouldn't have to have this conversation at all, I think is optimistic beyond belief, because those things are going to cause the European Union to have to answer some very difficult questions. So there was inevitability about this conversation. We set the timescale, but it was always going to happen, so we might as well get it out of the way now.
There was a leaked conversation last week where Boris was essentially distancing himself from this kind of Brexit. The implication being that this kind of Brexit would have been different. It would have been the sunny uplands, it would have been exciting, it would have been, you know, kind of leaving the marital home and having something worth having beyond that, politically speaking, obviously. Is there a sense that whatever the plan was, it hasn't turned out the way it was meant to, and therefore looking back, with the benefit of hindsight, it wasn't such a good idea? Because you voted for it thinking, as did most of the British public, that if they did, somehow Boris had a plan, Boris had a vision, Boris was exciting. They didn't vote for Brexit in order to have the carnage and the chaos and the kind of steady, as she goes, kind of leadership, putting it generously, some would say, that we have at the moment. It was meant to be a sort of leap for something exciting and bold and groundbreaking. And whatever it is now, it's not going to be that. And that's because Boris, in the end, pulled out that day you were crying on television. The only time you were crying on television.
I once stubbed my toe quite badly, and that almost brought me to tears. Look, I'm not going to stand here in front of you and say this was how we planned it to be, because then I'd be in real trouble, because you'd say, wow, if that's what the plan looks like, I hate to imagine what the alternatives would be. But to an extent, no plan survives contact with reality. And it was always going to be difficult. I think having such a small parliamentary majority makes it even harder, without a shadow of a doubt. And obviously the counterbalance of what I was saying about 2017 being good for us politically and forcing us to renew and refresh is the simple practical fact that we don't have a parliamentary majority. So it is having now to be a much more kind of compromised trade-off type of relationship. There is a strong argument to say actually not being able to just ram home idea number one and having to properly test it through parliamentary colleagues might mean that by the end of this process we end up with something better. That is a legitimate and credible argument. I also think that, and again, some of this is lessons that I've seen from the political outcomes of elections around the Northern Hemisphere, is that sometimes compromise isn't the right answer. I know that's going to sound really, really weird, because surely compromise is always the right answer, isn't it? A third way is always the right answer. Well, any motor mechanics in the audience? Anyone that does a little bit of fiddling with engines and stuff? No? Okay. This analogy might fall a bit flat then. So if you're driving, imagine you're driving and the engine starts making all funny clunky noises and you pull over. And you and your passenger open up the bonnet and look inside and you start debating. And you say, I think the radiator's empty and we need to put water in this engine. We need to put water in the radiator. And your passenger goes, no, not that kind of clunky noise. That kind of clunky noise sounds like some kind of thing in the camshaft or whatever. What this car needs is oil in the engine. And you go, no, water in the radiator. And they go, no. Engine on the cams. oil on the cans. And you have this debate. Now the logical political thing is, well, let's compromise. Let's get a bit of water, get a bit of oil, mix it together, put it in both. It's got to be the right answer, surely. You know? Sometimes the right answer is one of the two different options, not some awkward fudge in the middle. And this is where I know you and I are going to fall out a bit on this one. And maybe I might fall out with a number of people in the audience. So my view is the answer is to do what we said we were going to do, and not just me, David Cameron, you know, both the leaders of the left and the right, and all political commentators, and I suspect maybe even you at some point. What we said would happen if we voted, we were going to leave the European Union. And that does mean leaving the customs union, and leaving the single market, and leaving the ECJ, and defining domestically our trade policy, our immigration policy, our legal framework. That's what it means. That's what it means. And we could say, oh, well, that's one end of the spectrum. That's the hard Brexit. And then the other end of the spectrum is not leaving at all. And the whole way of saying, we recognise you can't do that bit. But there's got to be this thing in the middle where you have left, but you kind of haven't. No. It's a binary choice. You're in the club or you're not in the club. Yeah. And we voted to leave the club. And that does mean we're going to have to do some difficult stuff. And it does mean that we're going to have to negotiate some things. And it does mean that some of that energy and horsepower and experience is used up making a difficult thing work. But the answer is not to try and be both things at once, because you can't be both things at once. And I think if we can reconcile ourselves to that, instead of burning through all this parliamentary time and energy and the goodwill of our parliamentary colleagues, trying to make this centre ground fudge, which cannot exist, we're better off saying, that's what we're going to do, and we're going to make it work.